I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land. I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians who are present. My name is Dr. Brigid Freeman. I'm the Senior Researcher Education at the Australia-India Institute at the University of Melbourne, which is based in Australia. This is the second instalment of our India-Australia Economic Strategy series, sponsored by the Australian Government Department of Education, that aims to start a dialogue about education matters of relevance to both India and Australia. This is especially important in areas undergoing significant policy reform. The micro-credentials agenda touches on important matters relating to higher education, including short-form courses, teaching, learning and assessment mode, credit transfer, transnational education, industry demand and recognition. With the first webinar having focused on water, future instalments in this India-Australia Economic Strategy series will focus on the vocationalisation of school education and Australia-India research collaborations in both STEM and humanities and social sciences fields. Please note that this session is captioned in English and you can turn the live transcript and captions on. The recordings, transcripts, PowerPoint presentations and related materials will all be freely available on the Australia-India Institute website. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat function and we'll deal with those at the allocated times. I'm going to hand over to Dr. David Atkins. Dr. Atkins is Assistant Secretary of the Quality Branch of the International Division of the Australian Government Department of Education. David has previously served in other policy and implementation roles in the department and worked at the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. Prior to joining the Australian Public Service, David worked in Asia and Europe in senior private sector roles. He holds graduate degrees in physical sciences from the Australian National University and Public Administration and has completed the Australian Institute of Company Directors course. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Brigid. And I'd like to thank you for that lovely introduction and also attach myself to the acknowledgement of country that you gave at the start and acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people for those of us here in the ACT. The Department of Education is really very happy to be involved in sponsoring this India-Australia Economic Strategy series, and in particular this workshop on micro-credentials today. It's a really exciting area, but I thought it was worth just dwelling a little bit on the broader context. Last month, the Indian Minister for Education, who's also the Minister for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, the Honourable Minister Pradhan, visited Australia and was hosted by Minister Jason Clare, and they held a meeting of the Australia-India Education Council. That is also in a broader context of the 75th year of formal bilateral relations between India and Australia. Both nations are, in that sense, young, although both reflect much older nations as well, and cultures, continuing cultures as well. Also, both have exciting plans for their countries, and particularly for their young people accessing education. The minister's visit, Mr. Pradhan's visit, really brought that to the fore, and was a fabulous opportunity for us all to reflect upon India's National Education Policy 2020 and its agenda for transformational reforms in higher education, both in terms of courses, delivery methods, and also institutional academic mobility. And what better context in which to express some of these transformational reforms than in the increasing and burgeoning microcredentials agenda that is such an important part of the education discourse at the moment. Of course, microcredentials are also an important part of Australia's policy and policy reform landscape. And I know that one of my colleagues, Josh Donnelly, will be speaking about the National Microcredentials Framework and the microcredentials marketplace later today. I'd really commend those sessions to you, that session to you. It's a really interesting and indeed quite exciting time to be thinking about microcredentials, both in Australia and India. The recent Jobs and Skills Summit is also another marker in that sort of current environment where we've seen growing demand for skilled graduates and pathways for upskilling for workers that is flexible, responsive, and minimises time out of the workforce. And governments and education providers are thinking about how to meet those needs with quality learning, knowledge and skills transfer, and microcredentials will be an important part of that landscape.
Great, thank you. I
was just going to say, if I just finish, I'm just say today's webinar is very timely in that sense, and offers a chance to share knowledge and think about plans for the future, both in the shorter and the medium term. Hopefully there'll be partnership opportunities and opportunities to consider innovative solutions for both emerging and urgent skills needs. And I'm very confident that much fruit will bear from this session. Thank you, Brigid.
Great. Thank you very much, David. We appreciate that, and we certainly appreciate the support of the Australian government for this initiative. I'm going to hand over to Professor Pip Pattison. Philippa, or Pip Pattison AO, is a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, quantitative psychologist by training, and Emeritus Professor at the Universities of Melbourne and Sydney. She retired at the end of 2021, having served as Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education at the University of Sydney from 2014 to 2021, and prior to that as Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic at our university, the University of Melbourne. Professor Pattison was a member of the Microcredentials Working Group. Over to you, Professor Pattison.
Thank you very much, Brigid, and I'll just briefly share a quick presentation. Yes, I will be brief because I think the National Microcredentials Framework is fairly self-explanatory, but I'll emphasise two key things about it. And in introducing those two things, I'll just say a little bit about the driving motivation for the framework itself. We were very keen on the working group that the framework should enable everything that was going to be useful about microcredentials, so we avoided wherever possible being prescriptive. We wanted the framework to support industry needs, but also the needs of individual learners. We also realised we needed to connect the framework to what we call the AQF, the Australian Qualifications Framework, but we needed that to be a flexible form of connection because being sort of strictly tied to it would actually be counter to first motivation of being enabling. And then finally, we wanted it to be very accessible and transparent to everyone. So the two things that really sort of I want to emphasise today are, first of all, that the framework defines a microcredential in the Australian context, and the key aspects of the definition really come from those four driving motivations that I just mentioned. The first thing I'd emphasise is that a microcredential will be assessed, and it will be an assessment of learning. It will have a size that's quite variable from a minimum of 1 hour up to something a little bit less than an existing AQF qualification, which is typically the smallest of those, are roughly 6 months full-time learning or half a year. And in addition to that, it's a micro-credential can be additional to, alternate to, complementary to, or even a component part of the Australian Qualifications Framework Awards. And that's what I mean about flexibility. The second thing I'd emphasise is that the framework sets out some minimum information requirements in order to meet that intention for accessibility and transparency. The full list is actually in the framework itself, but I've picked out what I think are the key things. Every micro-credential does need to set out a set of learning outcomes, the way in which those learning outcomes are going to be assessed, the volume of learning in hours, so that's the total amount of effort by the student or the learner in completing the micro-credential, where relevant, to indicate recognition by an industry or professional body, where relevant, indicate possible credit or advanced standing into existing AQF awards, and where it's offered by a provider outside of some regulated standard like the TEXA Act or ASQA, then there has to be a statement of assurance of quality, that sort of mechanisms that the provider goes through in order to assure the quality of the micro-credential. A couple of other noteworthy things that may be of interest. Providers are also asked to consider using the descriptors of foundational or general capabilities that are in the Australian Core Skills Framework. They're asked to give some consideration to estimating or indicating some level of mastery in the micro-credential for a person who completes the micro-credential. And Josh is going to talk in a while about the Microcredentials Marketplace, which will be a website that actually allows students to find and compare and understand what kinds of credit are available for various micro-credentials. I won't say any more about that. And of course, it is envisaged down the track. I understand that there might also be recognition on the National Credentials platform. And the framework also sets out an intention to be reviewed within 12 months of offer. The final thing I'd say, and others will say much more about this, so I will be very brief. I think it was the intention of the working group that the framework's transparency and flexibility should actually be very helpful in navigating possible partnerships cross-nationally. And so we hope that it's going to be a convenient mechanism for developing partnerships for possible courses, for recognising credit in one or both directions, for supporting existing collaborations in, say, research and in the development of new and cutting-edge skills. And certainly, I think there's also an opportunity to collaborate between our countries in touching base on the process of review, just to make sure that we have built something that's useful for all of us. So that's all from me, and I hope the seminar goes well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Pattison. I'm going to hand over now to Professor Belinda Tynan. Professor Tynan is a principal advisor in the Deloitte Monitor Education and Public Sector Group based in Melbourne in Australia. Belinda brings over 24 years of experience in the tertiary education sector. She has proven commercial, entrepreneurial and financial acumen with demonstrated credibility across a diversity of academic environments, spanning pre-tertiary and higher education globally. Professor Tynan was also a member of the Microcredentials Working Group. Over to you, Professor Tynan.
Thank you, Brigid. I think we've got too many professors here. And it's always embarrassing to hear one's CV reiterated in front of you, but thank you for kind words. Look, I'm going to build a bit on what Pip just said. And in fact, she sort of started to open up at the end of her conversation there around what the opportunities were. I would say sort of generally that the education landscape is changing. We've noticed that over the last 2 years as we've sort of all endured COVID, and it still continues. And in that landscape, we've seen things happening like shorter form courses, becoming more acceptable. We've seen great global skill shortage. It doesn't matter what country, it seems you're in, everybody's crying out for more skilled workers. And we keep hearing these terms, upskilling, reskilling, and lifelong learning almost appears to be an agenda that has become much more acceptable. For many years, I think lifelong learning, we all talked about it and said it's all wonderful and that's what we all wanted to do and we all believed in that, and many of us do. But it was always a little bit to the side, whereas I think now it's come right smack bang in front of us, and those sorts of terms like upskilling and reskilling become much more important. I think what the National Microcredential Framework offers for Australia in particular is a definition of what a microcredential is, because the market has been very confused about what a microcredential is, both from a student's perspective, an employer perspective, and even at the university level. And if you look up across any number of university or education providers across the globe, everybody seems to have a different understanding of what that means. So what's really great for us in Australia now is we have a document that sets out a set of standards, which makes it a bit easier for those stakeholders. I would say that there are probably 3 groups that I'd talk to where there are opportunities. Those groups really sit around those 3 I just mentioned: students, industry, and education providers. And I'll use that term more broadly because that's not just universities. And in fact, in Australia, the majority of microcredentials, excuse me, are delivered in our vet sector through training packages. So we're still very nascent in a sense in terms of what's happening in the higher education sector. But for students, I think the opportunity for them is that they will be able to sort of work their way through the multitude of microcredentials that are available to them and have, I guess, a greater confidence in what is being offered to them, because there will be a set of standards that sit behind it. So when Josh talks later about, our fantastic new marketplace, that's one of the key features of that, is that students can have confidence in what they're looking at when they're making choices. And they may even get some credit. And I think that's a great opportunity to be able to say, well, I've done this small microcredential and it's going to give me some credit. And if I want to, that might articulate into something that's bigger. The other group, obviously the industry group, and, I've talked about skill shortage, and I think if we're all hearing that. For the industry sector, they've got to be able to retain the staff they have. And so they need to upskill and reskill the people they've got. And for many, many years, they've had these huge departments which actually have all this unaccredited training. So for them, there's an opportunity, I think, to partner with education institutions to give that training greater credibility and at the same time keep their staff, and maybe even that gets some credit into, a full-scale qualification at some point. And obviously the opportunity with an education provider is the co-construction or the co-development of microcredentials, so that you can get the halo of the qualification and quality coming from an education provider that will support what industry is doing. And at the same time, industry may well want bespoke qualifications that suit what they need within their workplace as well. Having the clear definition and the set of standards that sit underneath that gives those 3 sets of stakeholders confidence in what they're purchasing and what a microcredential is and what it means within the Australian qualifications framework. So I'm going to leave it at that, Brigid, because I'm sure as we go through this and we have all the panels, there'll be lots of things there that people will want to discuss. And if I go off screen for a moment, it's because I better go and get a glass of water. Thanks, Brigid.
Thank you very much, Professor Tynan. We really appreciate that. We appreciate your time. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat and they'll be monitored as we go through. There'll be a chance later to come to those questions. I'm now going to hand to two speakers, Professor Michael Sankey and Dr. Ratna Malar Selvaratnam. Professor Sankey is from Charles Darwin University in Australia, where he is the Director, Learning Futures and Lead Education Architect. In addition to this role, Michael is President of the Australasian Council of Open, Distance and eLearning and is a Fellow of the Australasian Society for Computers in Learning and Tertiary Education. Dr. Ratna Selvaratnam is the Manager for Learning Technologies and Innovation at Edith Cowan University. She is also an executive member of the board of the Australasian Council for Open, Distance and eLearning, ACODE. She has published in the field of microcredentials and was a member of the National Working Party for the Microcredentials Framework. Over to you, Professor Sankey and Dr. Ratna.
Thank you, Ratna. You need to unmute. Yeah.
All right. You can all view the screen, right? The slides?
Yes.
Great. So when Michael and I talked about putting this together, we understand it's about cross-border opportunities between Australia, India, and other countries. But we also understood that we needed to take stock of where we are at in Australia. And we have done this through several surveys conducted through ACODE, the Australasian Council for Open, Distance and eLearning. And this provides us a snapshot of the maturity of the sector in the fields of microcredentialing, where the gaps may be. And then Michael will talk about some of the opportunities cross-border that we may be starting to explore. So we ran the third survey on the state of microcredentialing in Australasia, because we also cover New Zealand and Fiji and a few other countries associated with us, in 2021. And we decided to look at a maturity model to see where the sector was in terms of implementation. Because when we first ran the survey in 2019, it was absolutely new. People were very much in their infancy. 2020 saw some maturity, especially in terms of policy. And 2021 saw other areas starting to mature as well. So the criteria we looked at in terms of participation in microcredentialing was several-fold. But the ones I want to highlight here are the strategy, pricing tactics, specified credit or RPL process for recognition of institutional credentials, mechanisms for quality assurance, methodology for identifying market opportunity, whether it was bottom-up, centrally led, or a combination, a defined ecosystem of thematically linked and interrelated microcredentials, level of industry linkages or co-design, and employer industry recognition. Now, there were some areas that the sector was fairly mature, or what we would call well-developed. We went through a range of whether it was non-existent, ad hoc, defined, managed, or well-developed. And in the survey, we found that the least mature seemed to be the quality and technical infrastructure within the local sector. Namely, was there a platform for delivering the microcredential in the first place or not? And the most mature seemed to be the shopfront and credentialing platform. And this is probably because you can get these off the shelf. And this can be your beginnings of offering it. It was really interesting, however, that no respondents felt that they were mature in a methodology for identifying market opportunity. And a lot of the work in the space seemed to be ad hoc at best. So what are we doing at Edith Cowan University at the institutional level? Now, this is just to give you an idea of what an Australian university might be doing, and a lot of you might be doing different things or similar things. We've developed the types of badging and the types of micro-credentialing, whether it's something that we offer in-house for volunteers, a standalone micro-credential that has industry linkages, or a credential that has a credit pathway to a full award. And we also have the infrastructure in place coming through from a participant who is not a student in the system, going through the shop front, going through the badging process, getting into our student management system, and how this will actually map to the Australian Higher Education Graduate Statement. So this is an example of an effort internally. And CDU, or Charles Darwin University, has a different approach. I'll pass it over to Michael here.
Thank you. So we started into micro-credentials a number of years ago before the framework was actually developed, so the national framework. So we've had to go back and look at what we've done in the past and say, okay, can we now credential that? Can we now that we have a definition of what a micro-credential is, can we now place some of these things within that framework? And the answer in many cases is yes, but the trick is in relation to assessment. So just an example of the types of micro-credentials we offer. One in the middle at the top there is one in Yolngu language. It's one of the Aboriginal languages we have in the Northern Territory. Next slide, please. Next click, please. So we offer 4 different types of awards, and not dissimilar to what Ratna showed us before. We offer, and I suppose you could actually place all those ones within these 4 in many cases. So we have micro-credentials for award. That is, we have for non-award, CPD, continuous professional development, or workplace, and then optional extras that we might use at different levels. However, what we've found through the implementation of the framework, and of course, because higher education institutions are quite complex beasts, we have lots of different systems. So we have curriculum management systems that manage the curriculum. We have student management systems which control enrollment. We have the learning management systems where we run these credentials, customer relationship management systems, etc. So next click, please. And all these systems need to, one, be controlled by policy, and then there's a whole range of other elements that need to be considered around this relationship with the systems and with what is happening for academic credit. So to say that we offer micro-credentials can, as Ratna pointed out earlier, is that it's quite simple to do that. You buy a micro-credential engine software system and you have a learning management system. Well, it's actually not that simple if we want to offer them in a holistic way. So next click, please. Lastly, I just want to talk through some, you can click through those points there, please, Ratna. The opportunities in relation to skill acquisition. So we can do this now at either higher education or vet level, but it's about accreditation. So we actually see that the acquisition of skills is probably the main aspect of micro-credentials that we can offer other nations. We can offer other people. So it's not just about the Australian sector, it's actually how others engage with the skills that Australian institutions might offer, and vice versa, how our Australian students might be able to benefit from skills that other countries might offer as well. To do that, of course, we need some cross-border understanding. Now, in the higher education sector, we did that with things like the Bologna Agreement and things like that in the UK, and Australia subscribes to that. And so it's not dissimilar to that, where we can come up with international arrangements around the portability of micro-credentials. That's probably the next step for us to look at, particularly in terms for us in Australia, the pathways into higher education, how we can bring in and associate these with other forms of qualifications. And that's why we want to align them with this Australian qualifications framework, how we might use them for professional development, for industry partnership and co-branding, for educational provider partnerships, where we actually partner with other institutions from other countries to actually supply the skills. Portability, of course, is around this whole notion of, okay, the Europeans have got their micro-credentials, we've got ours, how do they compare? So areas of interest for we see, particularly in our offshore development. And we're very closely aligned. Most of our international students come from the subcontinent around the IT and programming skills, green skills and human services and things like that. So there's some of the skills areas that we see are ripe for the picking in terms of what we as an institution can offer. That's it for me. Thank you.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Ratna and Professor Sankey. And together with the presentations by Professor Pattison and Professor Belinda, we now have a better understanding of some of the policy shifts, some of the practices at Australian universities, and some of the opportunities for cross-border collaboration in these areas. And together that has also identified some of the possible challenges. So I'd like to thank those speakers. We're going to now hear from Josh Donnelly. Josh has worked in the Australian government for nearly 15 years. He led work extending the unique student identifier from vocational education and training to higher education students. And he has also worked on a range of other reform initiatives across education, science and industry portfolios. As Director of the Student Projects Team within Higher Education at the Australian Government Department of Education, Josh is responsible for delivery of the Microcredentials Marketplace and the National Credentials Platform. Thank you, Josh. Over to you.
Thanks, Brigid, and it's very, very kind words. I back up Belinda's comment about when you hear an intro, but thanks for the opportunity to present, and yeah, good to go after all the working group members have talked up the framework and the marketplace, and without their work on doing the framework, well, the Microcredentials framework underpins the Microcredentials marketplace and the content that drives it. So yeah, I know I've said thanks to those members, but thanks again, and I'll probably be talking today where we are without them. So next slide, please. We'll just quick overview of the marketplace. So we, Australian government, we've got a grant agreement with the University's Admissions Centre as a delivery partner to basically develop a platform that just showcases all microcredentials offered by providers, allows learners to search and compare. Hopefully, I know it's been mentioned about credit recognition. That's part of the plan, whether that's from the get-go or down the track. That's a lot of work with providers. So see things there around stackability. I know Pip mentioned about National Credentials Platform, and yeah, another project that we're working on around the display of credentials. So of course we'd like for sort of a centralized platform where learners can display all their credentials that they've studied, including micro-credentials and any other achievements that they've done through their tertiary education. So we really want, with the Microcredentials Framework, which was the working group comprised of higher education, vocational education and industry. And the idea was to develop a framework that could be expanded across broader than higher ed. So, get that perspectives from our vet colleagues and also from industry as a sort of key enabler of their work with providers, and then what they sort of want from learners, and reskilling, upskilling. I think Belinda mentioned that as well. So just an overview of the platform. If we go to the next slide, we get sort of asked a bit about sort of benefits, and we sort of break it up into the different sort of cohorts. So learners, I think it's pretty obvious, a central platform where they can, I said search and compare, lifelong learning. I've heard that mentioned today. That reskill, upskill, where they can rapidly find credentials, short courses that they can, if they want to, higher qualification, change of jobs, etc., etc. So yeah, the rack and stack, the credit recognition, providers, obviously, hopefully they can, attain more students, and then you get that opportunity for cross recognition where they can, give credit, for students doing microcredentials at other providers. Employers, a key target audience in terms of there's a lot of work or increasing work between industry and providers around developing microcredentials and identifying priority areas or gaps in in sort of skills, where then there's there's a lot of companies out there that are engaging providers to help design, deliver micro-credentials. So, giving them a platform where they can display and then so then I suppose when students get a micro-credential and then provide to employer, there's that easy recognition, verification, it's quality assured and all that kind of good stuff. So I think there's benefits for a whole range of cohorts, and hopefully the platform will meet expectations. Next slide, please. Just where we're at right now, we our credit recognition, touched on that. I might just go to the next slide. Actually, I've already maybe got 5 minutes. Right now, where we are, we've sort of done we're sort of 1 and a bit years down the track. So we're a bit of an extensive testing phase. We've done it with a whole bunch of providers, and we've gathered a whole range of micro-credentials, and we've tested them and seen what works functionality-wise, display, all that kind of stuff that goes into a platform. In parallel, we're also on that sort of pathway to production. We've really ramped up our engagement with providers around what it would take to participate in the platform, and onboarding, and providing data, and and just there's sort of new data pathways that will have to be in place. So we've started to ramp that up. From a government perspective, we're just sort of briefing our government at the moment as to get a bit of a direction on when we can go live with it. We're anticipating end of the year, and that's if government agrees to it, and that's the plan we're working towards. So it'll be busy next few months if we get agreement to do that, and it'll a process where we've got to attain the data and give providers opportunity enough time to upload data and check it and make sure it's all robust ahead of a release end of the year. So that's where we are. Next slide, please. And just a bit more on that. Like I said, we're just final stages of our beta phase, our testing. We've done one big webinar. We'll probably do we'll do a couple more sort of consultation sessions with providers around the process to participate in the platform for the first release. I think that's probably an overview of the platform, where we're at, where we're going. Hopefully you go live at the end of the year, and then get a lot of support, get a lot of providers on board, and hopefully they can start to get some learners through the door from our marketplace next year. So thanks again, the opportunity to be here, and appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much, Josh. We really appreciate that overview. And so that concludes the part of today's webinar on Australia's changing environment. And we appreciate the presentations. Thank you very much. Each of those presentations and some of the key resources that the presenters referred to will be available on the Australia-India Institute webinar site for today. So thank you very much for that. We're going to go now to the next session, which is on higher education micro-credentials in India. We have 3 speakers. As those speakers are proceeding, I'd encourage you to please put some questions into the chat function, and we'll deal with those after the 3 speakers from India. The first speaker that we're very happy to welcome is Professor Vineeta Sirohi. Professor Sirohi is with the National University of Educational Planning and Administration in New Delhi in India, and currently holds the position of Chairperson, Steering Committee, MPhil PhD programs. Professor Sirohi holds a PhD in psychology and has over 30 years of experience in teaching, research, training, curriculum and material development. Her work area includes educational psychology, educational management, teacher education, guidance and counselling, and skill development and vocational education. Welcome, Vineeta.
Thank you, Dr. Brigid. And I will try to keep my time. And to begin with, I would emphasize that we are aware that the global workforce and economy are at crossroads. And with the dramatic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, and moreover, the recent trends in the high cost of higher education, employers' concerns about graduate skills and competencies of higher education, competencies while they are being hired by the employers, and the student frustration about the lack of job opportunities have all been catalyzed for taking the step into how the credentials should be looked into. So the policymakers and the individual credential agencies, universities are now rethinking the broader credentials continuum. The micro-credentials is an initiative to enhance workforce mobility and student career trajectories using the university level education. And they are also considered to be important in promoting more adaptable and customized connections between students and systems of higher education. We'll look into particularly the efforts that have been made in India regarding micro-credentials is that the institute, the premier institutes like the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, is that's located in the Karnataka state, is participating in this race to create credentials through MOOCs and SWAYAM. And there are other institutes like the Indian Institute of Technology and a handful of, say, central universities, which are also contributing to micro-credentials, but in a very sporadic manner. Just to briefly talk about the IMBX, that is the Digital Learning Initiative of the Indian Institute of Bangalore, which is founded on the philosophy of providing a high quality education to all, irrespective of financial, academic, or social backgrounds. And it is led by the faculty of IIM Bangalore. And they started offering these courses on the MOOCs on 2014 in partnership with edX. And now the IMBX courses are available on multiple platforms, including SWAYAM. And the learners are also do have access on a variety of online courses and programs which address both core and advanced business and management subjects. So with the rate of completion twice as those on other MOOC platforms, IMBX is an emerging leader in the digital space, and it has about 15 lakh learners spread across 190 countries. And coming to there's a critical issue about micro-credentials is the recognition of the credentials for further studies or employment. So in that case, if they are not integrated into the qualification framework, they are not considered to be integrated into the national or international learning ecosystems. So there are a number of policy initiatives being made by the government of India, and the embedded guidelines of the new education policy 2020 openly emphasizes on micro-credentials. And the policy also proposes to develop the National Higher Education Qualification Framework in sync with the National Skills Qualification Framework to ease the integration of vocational education into higher education. And now the draft National Higher Education Qualification Framework has already been formulated and placed on the public domain for comments and suggestions by the UGC. Then the policy also pronounced ICT policy in higher education, and institutions will have the option to run open distance learning and online programs provided they are accredited to do so in order to enhance their offerings, improve access, increase GAR, and also provide opportunities for lifelong learning. Then the credit transfers is also being emphasized, and UGC has taken out a regulation that in 2021, which facilitates an institution to allow up to 40% of the total courses being offered in a particular program in a semester through the online learning courses offered through SWAYAM platform. And the SWAYAM platform was launched in 2017, and it has above 7,000 courses and which are offered, and the enrollment figure goes up to 27 million learners. And with the during the COVID-19, the usage of SWAYAM platform increased many times. And a very interesting study was also done by the Ministry of Education in May 2022. It was an online survey, and the survey provides the inputs and insights into students' preferences at both national and state levels. And the survey shows that more than 70% of the students, 10,000 plus, spanning 338 universities and institutions across 29 states in India, expressed interest in availing credit transfer of SWAYAM courses. So we are making efforts into developing micro-credentials, but I would conclude with saying that Indian learners, the educators, the policy makers, they should all join hands together to balance macro and micro credentialing. And we need to be pushing the ongoing revolution of the knowledge economy. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Professor Sirohi, for introducing us to some of the extraordinary policy changes that are going on in India at the moment, and referring us to the Government of India's MOOCs platform, which is referred to as SWAYAM. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Manju Singh now. Dr. Manju Singh is Joint Secretary with the University Grants Commission in India. The University Grants Commission is a statutory organisation of the Government of India responsible for the coordination, determination and maintenance of standards of teaching, examination and research and in Indian university education. Dr. Singh, welcome.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy that I'm on this platform where we can avail this opportunity to discuss about the Indian higher education, what are the new changes, the transformation we envisage to bring about, and more so the role of micro-credentials in higher education and skill-related and employment and industry participation and so on and so forth. Thank you so much for the opportunity. We all know that India has launched its new national education policy in the year 2020, and there is an overwhelming response to this policy, and all the stakeholders, the students, the institution, the teachers, they feel energized and they look forward to radical transformative changes. So I will not go into all aspects of the policy, but I would like to mention one or two aspects which are directly related to the topic under discussion today. This policy is providing immense flexibility in the higher education system. Earlier, there were rigid boundaries between arts and science, science and engineering and medicine. So this policy talks about immense flexibility in terms of, choosing the discipline, in terms of offering transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary education, and then the flexibility of, learning at your own will, pace, and time. You can enter into a course, you can devote some time, or you can do some part courses, you can leave it, you can rejoin. And this system of multiple entry and exit will be very facilitative. So through this system, we remove the rigid boundaries, and the possibility of the learners gets very much expanded. Then India is a diverse country with a huge population. So one of our major concerns is also the gross enrollment ratio. So with this flexibility, we plan to not only retain the students and prevent or curtail the dropouts, but also increase the gross enrollment ratio of the higher education. And through this system, there is an offer of, having creative combination of disciplines that would really, facilitate and enable the multiple entry and exit. So with all these kinds of advantages of introducing a multiple entry and exit system, we are kind of, indirectly introducing, the micro-credential system, because now we have adopted a choice-based credit system. So the whole program is divided into, credits and courses. So a kind of a stacking option is available in higher education. And now with this flexibility, and this flexibility is introduced through a national platform called the Academic Bank of Credit. So our institutions, they are encouraged to register in this Academic Bank of Credit, and whatever credits the students earn, maybe through online mode, or maybe through blended learning, or maybe through conventional mode of education, they are deposited in the bank. And then the bank accumulates the credits, it reviews it, and the student can redeem its credit and earn a qualification. And there is also flexibility in, the offering of qualifications. If you complete 1 year in higher education system, you can be awarded a certificate. If you complete 2 years, you can be awarded a diploma. If you complete 3 years, you can be awarded a degree. And the definition of a degree has also become flexible. It can be a 3-year degree at undergraduate level or a 4-year degree. Then depending on what has been the length of your undergraduate education, you can have either a 1-year master's or a 2 years master's, or you can even opt for a research option in the undergraduate degree. So, immense flexibility has been introduced through the Academic Bank of Credit and by multiple entry and exit. Now, a lot of concerns are there. What is the learning outcome at each level? What is the employability of the passing out graduates? Then what is the acceptability of the Indian qualifications abroad? What is the acceptability of the foreign qualifications in India? So to address all these issues, we have come out with a draft, and we are very, on the verge of announcing the National Higher Education Qualification .
We've just lost you, Dr. Singh. Okay, we've just lost Dr. Singh, I think.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yes. So I was talking about the National Higher Education Qualification Framework, which will provide, learning outcomes at every level. And in this National Higher Education Qualification Framework, we have also embedded the National Skill Qualifications Framework. So the aim is, to provide seamless transition from the skill ecosystem into the higher education's ecosystem and vice versa. So it is a common one. So you can start with a skill course, you can enter into higher education qualification, or as part of the higher education course also you can do certain skill courses. And we have also come up with a very, enabling regulation on embedding the internship and apprenticeship into our higher education qualification. Now, earlier we used to think of internship and apprenticeship, either in the semester break or after you complete your program. But now you can do that as a course, as a credit course, which will provide you on-the-job training, which will have an assessment system. You will be graded, and those marks are entered in your transcript. So it is as good as any theory program. So this is also a kind of a micro-credential with on-the-job training, which will be of great advantage. And when I was talking about the academic bank of credit, it doesn't store just credits earned in the Indian universities. Even the credits earned in the foreign universities can be, entered and accumulated and redeemed through our academic bank of credit. So this is a very transformative system. And then we have also emphasized on introducing skills right at the level of school education. So another important initiative is that besides the National Higher Education Qualification Framework, a national curriculum framework is also in its final stages. So this will provide a uniform credit framework right from school, from level 1 to PhD. So every qualification has a level, has a learning outcome, has a credit assigned to it, and there is a seamless movement or transition from school to higher to skill, and so on and so forth. So that will immensely contribute towards encouraging the micro-credential studies in India. And like I was mentioning earlier, the choice-based credit system. Through this system, we have a system of a major subject, a minor subject, and a supporting subject. So the major may be, let's say, life sciences, but the minor can be statistics or information science. The supporting subject can even be psychology. So that is the opportunity wherein short-term small courses can be taken individually and be embedded into part of the higher education system. Of course, the challenge here still remains that we do insist that these courses should be taken in the universities or the colleges. But I'm sure, with the changing transformation across the world and the changing ecosystems of higher education, more changes will be introduced in our higher education system as well. Then another important thing which I want to share with you is regarding the skill sector is that we now have a National Council for Vocational Education and Training. This is the agency which will identify and approve, the qualifications. So skills have now been formalized into qualifications. These are the short-term courses. They are not part of the degree program. So they are a kind of a, micro-credential in the making. And these are at all levels, right from the level of school to the highest level. And then you can do one course at a lower level, and then that becomes the prerequisite for another course at the higher level. So this Council for Vocational Education will approve the qualifications, and it will also approve the sector skill councils. These sector skill councils are the bodies, which identify the skill gap between the employable people and the industry, and what will be their interaction with their academia. And they are the assessing bodies. We have as many as 37 sector skill councils, right from leather technology to beauty, to hospitality, to foods, to electrical engineering, and so on and so forth. Every possible, skill or expertise has been catered for. So they assess, they certify. So it is not a degree which they give, but it is a certification at various levels in various disciplines and fields of specialization. So I feel that that is also a kind of a micro credential in the making. And we do encourage, even in our higher education system, for students to take up courses which are beyond their curriculum, so that they can bring up their competencies and capacities and help in employability. I think I'm overshooting my time, so I will like to pause here, and I would be available for discussions subsequently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manju Singh. I think that your presentation is most welcome, and it clearly indicates that India's various education systems are undergoing transformational change, and that in order to progress conversations and discussions about Australia-India education engagement, We need to both understand some of the policy reforms in our own system and to start to grapple with some of the changes that are happening in India's various systems, including higher education. Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. I'd next like to introduce you to Professor Srivastava. And just before I do that, we'll probably have time for a few questions after this. We have two. One more question after that would be fantastic. So please feel free to put that in the chat. Professor Srivastava is Additional Director with the Consortium for Educational Communication in India. The Consortium for Educational Communication, or CEC, is an autonomous inter-university centre of the University Grants Commission, or UGC, where Dr. Manju Singh is Joint Secretary of the UGC. The CEC was established to address the needs of Indian higher education through the medium of television and emerging ICTs. The CEC massive open online courses, or MOOCs, are offered on the Government of India's platform for MOOCs, which, as I indicated before, is referred to as SWAYAM. And this platform hosts virtual higher education courses taught by eminent Indian subject experts. Over to you, Professor Srivastava.
Thank you. I represent the Consortium of Educational Communication, which is one of the inter-university center of University Grants Commission. And we work as a national coordinator for the MOOCs programs, that's the for higher education sector, non-technical higher education sector. MOOCs in India have been developed. MOOCs in India have been developed in two sectors, private sector and the government sector. There are so many startups and established organizations running online courses in different areas of education. However, this presentation and my purview is confined to the MOOCs being delivered to the Indian students from the government side. This started in 2016 and under a platform which is popularly known as SWAYAM platform. And to operate this SWAYAM platform and using this platform, delivering of the MOOCs programs was divided in several categories of the education. The Consortium for Educational Communication deals with and delivers the programs, develops also the programs in the area of non-technical higher education sector, all degree programs. So there are several national coordinators in different areas. Consortium for Educational Communication deals with the higher education non-technical sector, and the technical education sector is being dealt with Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Similarly, the school education is dealt up with National Council for Educational Research and Training, and for the school dropouts, MOOCs programs are also delivered through an organization which is also a national coordinator for that sector. It is known as National Institute of Open Schooling. All the programs which fall under the diploma and degree categories, they are being dealt up with Indira Gandhi National Open University. So this is how the under Ministry of Education, different sectors of education are covered as far as online education is concerned through different national coordinators. Now, talking about Consortium for Educational Communication, it is one of the inter-university center of University Grants Commission, and we operate in an entirely different setup. We've got an autonomous status, and we operate through a network of 21 EMRCs, Educational Media Multimedia Research Centers. These centers are also governed by an autonomous board of management, and they are housed in one of the universities across the country. And these centers have been established under a very special arrangement with a tripartite agreement between University Grants Commission, Communication for Educational Communication, and the host university. So the development of the programs and delivery of the program is carried out by CEC through these EMRCs, which are spread across the country at 21 different locations. And these EMRCs are in an arrangement in which we work in a partnership. And you can see that these EMRCs are spread across the country, covering the entire country. And therefore, and this is how the education is delivered to every nook and corner of the country, even to the remotest places through this SWAYAM platform. Then the development of the delivery of educational programs through online mode was started here in this country under Ministry of Education in 2016. From 2016 to 18, for a period of 2 years, it was in a pilot mode. And the main objective was to popularize the online education among the students. And after 2018, and since then the credit transfer-based programs were delivered, and which were delivered semester-wise. So the students of studying in different universities started offering taking these courses and appearing the examination, which is conducted by an independent body, which is called National Testing Agency, and they used to earn the credits, and those credits were transferred to their degrees. And after 22, from now onwards, from this semester onwards, we are entering into a third phase in which the online programs, MOOC programs are developed in 8 identified undergraduate degrees. And this is how now we are in the third phase, and we are developing the programs for 8 identified degrees, which will be later expanded to almost all the degree programs which are covered under the non-technical higher education sector. Till date, we have developed about 460 MOOCs, and we have delivered 963 programs through online mode. And overall, more than 21 lakhs students have enrolled, and the certificates which we have issued since 2018 are more than 26,000. So this is how the numbers reflect that the students are taking up these courses, and the education is being delivered through this mode the students who are in remote areas or who want to take the subjects which are not available in their respective universities, it is becoming popular and like that. The government has also taken an initiative of offering these MOOCs in all the regional languages, because India being a very large country, the different languages are spoken in different regions of the country. So now these standard MOOCs are being translated into 12 prominent regional languages, and as soon as the translation will be completed, which has already started, then the MOOCs will be offered in different regional languages also across the country. For on pilot basis, we started this translation process for 35 identified UG courses. Now we are translating the 8 degree programs which are being developed simultaneously also. You can see that details of the UG MOOCs, which has already been covered, that we have, but the students have earned the 26,000 credit certificates, more than that. And in the delivery has been through PG delivery, the credits that have been earned by is more than 6,500. So as such, in last 6-7 years, the online mode of delivery of education has become very popular here, and we look forward to cover every possible degree and every possible area where the subjects can be delivered. These are the initiatives which are within the purview of CEC, which I'm supposed to share it with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Srivastava. It strikes me in seeing that when we talk about scale in Australia, we need to rethink what we might imagine scale actually might mean to our neighbours like India. So thank you very much, Professor Srivastava. We're very pleased to have had that contribution from our Indian speakers to develop some greater understanding of the amazing policy reforms and the capacities and agendas from both Australia and India. We're going to go to questions for about 5 or 6 minutes. Professor Sankey and Dr. Ratna will lead us in what those questions are. And then after that, we will go to the panel discussion. And the panel discussion will have one question. And that question will be, what opportunities do you see for collaboration around this micro-credentials agenda? So Dr. Ratna and Michael, Professor Sankey, we have questions, please.
Yeah, I'll jump in with the one from Madeline since she's a colleague. Her question was, how are we monitoring the quality of these programs, particularly if we are giving credit for them?
Would somebody like to answer that? How are we monitoring the quality of programs?
So is that in the Australian context or the Indian context?
It was asked during the Australian panel, but I think it's open to all.
Yeah. In terms of ourselves at Charles Darwin University, we ensure the quality because our micro-credentials are accredited. And so we're not going to be offering micro-credentials that are not accredited through our quality committee. So our academic programs committee oversee any program that is going to be offered for academic credit. And of course, the university in Australia or the federally funded universities are self-accrediting universities. So we have dispensation under TEXA to actually offer quality registered courses, and TEXA, of course, monitor that. So if it is a micro-credential, it is accredited in our situation, and that means that there is a quality associated with that.
Thank you very much, Michael. Dr. Ratna, was there another question, please?
Yeah, this is from Ian. What are perhaps 3 practical actions that might be taken to support micro-credential qualification recognition between Australia and India? And is this a worthwhile venture given the market share?
Who is the brave person who would like to address the qualifications recognition challenge? It's like the elephant in the room. Do we have somebody? Professor Pip, would you like to have a go at that?
Yes, thanks, Brigid. It is indeed a tricky question, but I think that's where partnerships might come into play. I think if people can identify areas where credit is going to make a lot of sense and therefore be worth doing carefully up front, then I think that's where the key opportunities are going to lie, rather than seeking it to set up a system where credit will always be available in all possible instances where it might be applied. I think partnerships are going to be absolutely critical to making this practical and functional. And so, for example, institutions and or industries might get together to sort of work out what together they can do through partnership and through a proper evaluation of credit opportunities.
Thank you very much, Professor Pattison. And we do know that there are government-to-government discussions about qualifications recognition occurring between Australia and India. Reflecting my research on this area, I'd suggest, Ian, that in the first instance, it may well be more a question for our own systems to address the issue of recognition of short-form courses within our own qualifications before necessarily considering the question of qualifications recognition within our region and across borders. So we may go on to the panel because we're getting to the end of our session. Just before we do that, I'd like to also welcome Professor Keitha Dunstan. Professor Keitha is Provost at Bond University and is joining us for our panel. Thank you very much. Professor Keitha oversees research, learning and teaching strategies and the Bond University College Preparation and Pathways Program. Previously, Professor Dunstan was a Commissioner of the New Zealand Securities Commission and Senior Faculty at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. And New Zealand is almost Australia. So welcome, Professor Keitha. I probably shouldn't say that out loud, should I? Okay, so on this panel, we have Dr. Manju Singh from the University Grants Commission, who we've met previously. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Professor Vineeta Sirohi from NIEPA. Thank you, Professor Vineeta. Professor Keitha Dunstan, and also some members of the Microcredentials Working Party, Belinda, Michael, Dr. Ratna, and Pip. If you would like to answer the question, you're very welcome. So we'll have just one question, I think, and please feel free to respond either in turn or if not, I might prompt you. My question is, what opportunities do you see for Australian universities to engage with India around higher education, micro-credentials and related reforms? And of course, Professor Srivastava, if you would like to respond as well, please feel free. So what are these opportunities? Who would like to answer that first? We're happy to go around the presenters first. Who wants to go first?
Well, why don't I jump in first, Brigid?
Thank you.
And I'll just take one point and then others can maybe build on it. I was sort of thinking that, you know, listening to everything that has just been gone there before, I learned an enormous amount about what is happening in India and how they manage micro-credentials on scale. So I probably think one of the main things that I'm taking away from today for me personally is just how much I've learned already about what's going on. And I think that that is a really key thing for Australia, is getting a depth of understanding, because it feels like we're at the beginning of a journey in higher education in particular, that we could do a lot to be just learning from each other at this point in time. So I might start the conversation off with throwing that in and see what others have got to say as well.
Thank you very much. Who would like to go next? Michael?
So I'd just like to say I have two. But what I'd like to say is that we have skills that institutions in India will find helpful, and institutions in India have skills that we will find helpful. Now, micro-credentials is about skill development primarily. I mean, there are obviously other benefits as well, but it is primarily about skill benefits. So I would see benefits from Australian students who might want to get employment in India to undertake some skills based in India, some micro-credentials. How about that? Or vice versa, Indian students who might want to get some employment in Australia, take some micro-credentials in Australia and get that Australian flavour to their particular discipline. So I think there are opportunities there for both of us.
Thank you very much. Vineeta?
Thank you, Dr. Brigid. I just wanted to point out one or 2 points regarding the collaboration and opportunities. First of all, yes, in collaboration on research in micro-credentials would help to identify grey areas. So there could be a possibility where there could be a collaborative research being done on this, because this is not a very investigated area in India as of now. And then we need to have some kind of a documented meta information and data regarding the micro-credentials and what are the courses and the skills that are required in the various sectors of economy, so that we can push in micro-credentials in those areas, which would be helpful. The second point I would like to point out is regarding the promotion of the bilateral student mobility. The student mobility is also a concern and a challenge. And we need to have mutual recognition. Both the countries should have a mutual recognition on the qualifications that are there as related to the micro-credentials. And if we try to link the short-term exchange programs with the concept of micro-credentials that can lead to the establishment of subject-specific common standards, and that would be supported by, of course, the credit transfer and accumulation. I think that would be a possibility of collaboration between India and Australia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Vineeta. In terms of education researcher collaborations, one of the things that the Australia-India Institute identified in our consultations about India's national education policy was that whilst there were STEM-based collaborations between researchers in Australia and India that were very well established, that there were very few, if any, education researcher to education researcher collaborations. So we recommended to government that the joint PhD academies establish joint education PhDs. And also we recommended that there be a seminar series involving education researchers from Australian universities and Indian higher education institutions. So the Australia-India Institute, with the support of the Australian government, is partnering with a number of institutions in India, including NIEPA, JNU and Symbiosis International University, to launch a series of monthly seminar series for education researchers next year to connect education researchers. And we really welcome education researchers that have a technology focus. So we look forward to seeing some of you next year. Belinda, you have your hand up.
Yes, and I've just got to, I'm very slow at this. I prefer Microsoft Teams. Look, I've got a few other points that I can throw in. One of those is around international education, and our previous speaker, Vineeta, just sort of mentioned some of those things around mobility and recognition. But there is obviously something around how micro-credentials could be pathways. And we sort of learned through COVID, some universities in Australia did this extremely successfully, and many students were offshore before coming to Australia. There could possibly be, some fantastic commercial models where there could be relationships with Indian universities or education providers that lead students into Australia and starting some of that study prior and, in India, which I know sort of already happens in some places, but micro-credentials could offer that opportunity. I think there are also a range of pathways in that, so there is not only the recruitment aspect of bringing students into Australia, but there is this notion of mobility and credit. And as Professor Vineeta sort of said, if there was some mutual recognition and the quality and the standards were equivalent to both our systems, then there would be a greater translation between the two nations. I think there's also something with industry. There are some really large multinational companies that work across jurisdictions where micro-credentials would be very useful, especially in digital. And I know for India, that's a huge expansion and speciality. And in Australia, similarly, we're seeking highly qualified individuals in various digital areas. So I think there's probably something about whether or not there are partnerships or relationships that could happen with some of these multinational companies that sit across borders where Australian and Indian institutions could support, the development of workforces, globally in a sense. Probably some really unique models that could happen there, which would be quite interesting. So probably two things there. I think there's probably the international student, the global piece, and multiple different pathways and recognition there. But along with, some really clever and very targeted industries that need particular sets of skills and setting up something sort of a little bit more innovative that's not just really a credit-bearing MOOC or micro-credential into a qualification. And I think that would probably suit both countries, because I think we're probably all looking for different forms of revenue and revenue diversification. And that's what the micro-credentials can offer, alongside what we're talking about today too. But that's a very commercial lens. but I thought it might add to the conversation as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Belinda. We have two of the panel members with their hands up. I'm going to actually go to Professor Dunstan first because we haven't heard from you, and then we'll go to Dr. Ratna. And I think probably then we may hear from Dr. Singh after that, hopefully, and then we'll be closing for the day. So thank you, Professor Dunstan.
Thank you, Brigid. And it is an opportunity, but as we know, when we talk about opportunities, we talk about, well, there's a challenge and then there's an opportunity to solve the challenge. I think the challenge is that there's going to be a lot of noise in this space. So there's a lot of actors, there's a lot of micro-credentials, there's a lot of suppliers, and how do consumers of micro-credentials work through all of that and find quality? And I think both Pip and Belinda talked about the value of partnerships. So I think one of the opportunities for educational institutions in Australia and India is to partner, to work together, because if you are a potential learner in India, you don't know anything about higher education institutions in Australia, and vice versa. So if we partner with each other, we can, as Michael talked about, Australian universities are self-accrediting. So we already have, a lot of credibility behind us in Australia. So if we were to partner with Indian institutions, then Australian students would say, well, we understand the quality that must be behind that for that partnership. And I think that works both directions. And as Belinda said, I think that works with potential industry partners as well. So it's about helping the cream, if you like, to rise to the top. So those of us who are operating in this space in a quality way, to be working with each other and sharing resources so that there's the best possible outcomes. Because when you have a noisy space like this, there could be some very low quality operators out there, and we need to protect learners.
Thank you very much, Professor Dunstan. Dr. Ratna?
Yeah, just very quickly, one of the outcomes we saw was a gap in market research. This is an outcome we saw in the ACODE survey. So I think there's a real opportunity here for our countries to work together to really figure out what is the space we need to be offering this education in, because one of the birds of micro-credentialing is that it's market-driven in the first place, but we are not filling in the gap, and we might be able to do that together.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ratna. And Dr. Singh, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I totally agree with the panelists and the views which have come forth. The need of collaboration between Indian and Australian institutions and in the field of micro-credentials, cannot be, more overemphasized. We need to collaborate, we need to get together. In the national education policy, a very important dimension which has been mentioned is, the global citizenship. We want our learners to, evolve as global citizens, which have the capacities and competencies of, working in a multicultural environment. And that is where I think an important role of the micro-credentials, will play, because they must learn the critical, analytical abilities and, the latest and the contemporary innovations and the, the market-driven competencies, so that, our graduates are more employable. So definitely micro-credentials have a role to play in education, whether it is in the formal education sector or even in the informal, or maybe as additions, complementary to, the education, the formal education setup. So it is a new area, and we look forward to collaborations. And I'm sure fruitful engagements will pave the path for, improving the quality of higher education. Of course, the quality of the education providers remains a challenge. So quality assurance and accreditation is a concern, because see, when we allowed twinning, we were extremely quality conscious. We wanted only the best, the top 1,000, times and QS from the foreign side. And from the Indian side also, the rules remain the same, either the top 1,000 or we have our domestic national institutional ranking framework. So top 100 in that. So quality should be, one of the major concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manju Singh. I'd like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to all of the presenters and perhaps more importantly to the participants who are interested in Australia-India collaboration, who are interested in quality learning for students and others, and who are interested in working together. The presentations and the recording and the transcript and other resources will be made available online. We may reach out to you to see whether you're interested in having your registration details made publicly available or whether you prefer not to. For those who are interested in connecting with others to be more connected. On behalf of the Australia-India Institute, thank you very much. And I'd like to also acknowledge the contribution of the Australian Government's Department of Education. We've thoroughly enjoyed this series to date. We look forward to our next webinar on vocationalisation of school education. Thank you, and we will see you again in the future. Goodbye.